So I'm looking for other ways that, any ways that that my experience can help benefit others. Because, I think, like I said, a lot of this, same questions that, I grappled with, I think lots of people are grappling with. And, I think there's a lot of value in just talking with others and hearing stories and learning from other stories.
Step into the world of success with Your Brand Amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. As soon as Catherine Connelly sent me her book, I felt like we were going to be instant besties because I resonated so deeply with everything she had to say. Catherine, I'm really thrilled to have you on Your Brand Amplified. Thank you so much for giving me your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book too.
Yes, very much so. And I know we have a special offer we're going to tease out at the end for listeners. Your book is Designing Success, Lessons for 20 Years as a Female Tech Entrepreneur. You started your tech journey with MyYearbook when you were 15, when most of us were definitely not thinking about starting companies, getting involved in technology, learning how to build apps. What was the impetus behind deciding to start a business at such an early age?
I think really, so kind of looking back, it doesn't seem like it almost felt like, oh, we have an idea, let's go do it. But I think that the reason we were in that kind of mindset was because growing up, I have a brother that's, much older than me. He's 11 years older than me. And he had started his first company while he was also a student in college. And so growing up, I was exposed to entrepreneurship from like the age of 7 and just seeing my brother build something, successfully exit it. And so I always knew entrepreneurship was an option. And when our parents would, send my other brother Dave and I out to visit Jeff, like we would be in his office, we would be, helping packets, and he'd pay us in toys and DVDs. So, we got to be kind of a part of it. And it was not only good from like seeing him like, oh, this is what success can look like. This is a successful journey. But we also saw the hard parts too on like family vacations. We remember spending a lot of time in like internet cafes because like something was wrong with with their company, and they're trying to fix it, and just widespread internet wasn't as big of a thing in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, at that time. And so, so then by the time that Dave and I actually had the idea for MyYearbook, it just seemed like, well, why wouldn't we start a company? And, I think that was kind of such an important aspect of our journey, because I don't think there were a lot of kids that were, 15, 16 that really knew about that option. I think, you're doing your career paper, and there probably at that time, mid 2005, in 2005, there probably weren't like that many, examples that you could really see yourself as.
Yeah, absolutely. So you grew up seeing this journey from your family, from your older brother, just thinking this was normal. And basically, so what was it like? What was the initial idea behind MyYearbook specifically?
Yeah, so the idea for MyYearbook, so Dave and I were new in our high school and we're having some trouble making new friends. And so I guess being super nerds, we're like, why don't we create a website to do that? But that was the whole concept. It was like, okay, well, we're new in our school. Let's see, the actual yearbook is not a good tool for meeting new people. And so we named it we need the website MyYearbook. We're like, let's see if we can make it so that we could actually get to know our classmates. They could put in their favorite TV shows. They could have profile photos that actually look like them instead of their yearbook photo, which are awful. And so, it kind of started from like that, just like, that was like the scrap of the idea. And, but we got really excited starting to talk about it. We pitched the idea to Jeff at just like normal family dinner. And he's like, oh, he was aware of Harvard because he just had read about it in Harvard Alumni Magazine. And he was like, oh, okay, well, this could be the Facebook for high school students. And it wasn't. We ended up pivoting pretty early on. But that was like the initial idea. Was like, okay, this could be, that was the initial seed of like, okay, now we have this idea. Then we, of course, needed to build it. And, we didn't have any tech background. So that led into kind of our, one of my core interest is just lots and lots of learning. I feel like you can always find the answer to any question. So that was, started on this like, okay, now we're going to be entrepreneurs. How do you do that?
Mm-hmm. And these are questions that most entrepreneurs go through, especially I know a lot of people in the tech world who are the non-technical founders. And so they have the idea like you did. They know some of the things they want to implement, but they don't know exactly what it means to be an entrepreneur or how do you find the right technical partners. So it doesn't really matter what age you are when you're trying to answer these questions.
That's so right. Yeah. And that's still the watch. So I do like these like monthly office hours where, entrepreneurs come in with the questions. And that's like such a common one. It's like, how do you find, the non-technical partners? And there's, a number of things you can do. We ended up outsourcing the original code to Mumbai. We used Elance on the internet, now Upwork to do that. And, that worked well for us. But there's, a number of paths you can go on. But, being a non-technical entrepreneur is, I think, pretty common. I think it's going to become even more common with, you can use, AI and do some vibe coding. Now, that's much easier at this point if you understand a little bit of code yourself, or if you understand a lot of code yourself, it's even better. But there's just a lot more available now, I think, that can make that prototyping easier. And so I think when people get that idea, I was like, oh, but how do I build it? I've heard from, some people that are like, oh, well, I need to do everything myself. That means I need to learn all these skills. And there's so many things. It's like, no, you can outsource that. You can figure out, like, there's some things that as the founder, as the entrepreneur, you need to own, like, as it relates to the strategy of the business. But then there's so many other things that if that isn't in your wheelhouse, and if you want to get started, like, don't lose your momentum because you're, learning some type of super niche skill, you can find that. And when it comes to, development, obviously we needed a development team. It made sense to use Elance, and it was done well. Once we had the initial site built, then we went in-house, and at that point, we're able to start hiring, US developers. But I think too, when you're looking at those, our early team, a lot of them were like fresh out of college and just like ready to start building too. And I think that when it comes to, finding that team, finding the people that kind of gravitate towards the idea, I think so much more of it is about passionate people that you can work well with than necessarily like knowing exactly the skill, because the company's going to change. Like I mentioned at the top, like we pivoted very early on about being, the Facebook for high school students to being about meeting new people kind of like nearby. And that was just the first of many of our pivots. Like, I was at the company for 18 years. I would say like a massive shift in what the company did about every 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask about the pivot, because that's also something a lot of times people say, I have this idea. Here is my ideal customer. Here's the pain point that I think that I'm solving for. And then you get in and find out that, yeah, even if you've done research or anecdotally believe that this is your core audience, you find that you may need to make tweaks. And there's a couple things that you've said that I think are really interesting. First of all, I remember early days of the internet, and some of my best friends today are people I met on Friendster. And then the other thing is that a lot of people like yourself who find themselves in a new situation, maybe don't find themselves as accepted, or, you have a certain skill set, find their people online. Even a number of people who are early on in Vine or Musical.ly or platforms like that have told me it came from a sense of not feeling like they belonged where they were, but they found their people. So I want to learn a little bit more about how you moved and transitioned from MyYearbook into being able to meet other people in your area. And did that come just naturally because you saw that those were the people that were trying to sign on? Did you do more market testing? How did you decide those points? Yeah.
Yeah. So when we first launched in just our high school, we got about 400 people to sign up in the first week. And that was just through wearing fun shirts to school every day that said things like answering the questions that matter most. Who are your friends' friends? And are they hot? Silly things. And that's so that we got like our initial, school to join, basically, of a good chunk of our school. And we started just getting tons and tons of feedback. It was the perfect, beta audience, because now we're like, and we're surrounded by it. Like, people were coming up to us on the track, at the lunch tables, and just telling us not only their ideas for the site and how they think it should work, but also their pain points. Like, we found out that one of our features, it was a superlative feature, people thought was very, very stale because, Dave and I were winning every single category because people kept voting for the founders, and so it was like not changing. So that ended up leading us to an idea of like, oh, well, let's make it a head-to-head competition. And that made it significantly more interesting. And it was called Battles, and went on to be a very successful product for us. But, so we were finding out like what the pain points were. But then after we were in our schools, okay, well, how do we get to every school? And so our first thought was, let's grow the way that Facebook did. Let's go school to school. The hard part about that was that high schools don't really have the same gating mechanics that a college can use. So, you have the college email address. Like it's a bit different in high school. You can't really gate other schools. And so we're like, okay, well, we tried we tried one school from our previous town. We tried that school. And then a few of our, camp friends were like, oh, can you try to get people to join from your schools? And it just wasn't catching on to the same thing. And so kind of out of necessity, we're realizing like, okay, how we wanted to grow isn't really working. Let's try to do something a little bit broader. We ended up, without really a marketing budget. So we ended up so actually how it started was we were looking, it's like, oh, maybe we could get some banner ads. Let's get more people here. Let's test how they use it, that type of thing. And so we were going to buy banner ads. We contacted the site we're going to buy from, and they're like, actually, we're for sale. And it made sense. And so we were able to actually acquire a ton of user-generated content, like these quizzes. So if it like BuzzFeed quizzes are now, except it was like, what Friends character are you? Because it was, the mid-2000s. And these quizzes were so popular. People would put their, quiz results on their AIM profiles, on their MySpace pages. And so we're like, okay, if we have a ton of quizzes like that, we can use that. People can share it. That could be its own, we call it engineering reality. It can be their own, it could be how we get the new members. And so we created that. We also had like a layout site. And so we basically had all these ways of finding out about us through normal use cases, how people would be using their MySpace, but they might notice, hey, I like this layout. Let me see what this MyYearbook thing is all about. And by taking advantage of the existing viral channels, we were able to get our first 1 million members within the first 9 months. And what we learned as we were doing that, so before we obviously hit the 1 million member mark, we were seeing, okay, this school has like 15 people in it. This one has 400 people in it. Their retention rates were the same. It seemed like it didn't actually matter. Like the school network that we had originally created it for didn't really matter at all. What mattered more was just that there was some people nearby to talk to, but that could mean like in your state. It didn't have to be, as hyper local to your school. And so that was like, okay, that broadened what we could do. And we're like, okay, well, now it's about meeting people nearby. And I love what you said about, finding the place where people belong, because that is exactly what we were seeing. People would find like we would get, and one of my favorite parts of the role when I was at a company was hearing what members would say about like, who they found and things like that. And people were finding their people. And especially in our later years when we launched a live streaming feature, that was what really made the live community special, is because sometimes you had people that, didn't really have that support, those connections in their normal like day-to-day life. And so they had this place that they could go where all of a sudden, they had friends. They had this fantastic supportive community behind them, and just seeing how excited they were for that made us as the team also more excited to build it. So whenever, we would have these, testimonials coming in, we would be reading them for our engineers, for our trust and safety team, for, accounting, everyone, to know that, what we're working on, what we're building right now, like this is who we're building it for. It's not just about trying to make, daily active users go up by 10% or something like that, because that's not exciting. There's no emotion, there's no vision for that. But actually be able to feel like, oh, these 2 members, they got married, they had a baby. We sent them this onesie. This is their baby in the onesie. Being able to have like those stories of like those heartwarming stories are just like why someone actually uses the product. It also just helps you make a better product and make you want to show up every day. Because, this like day to day, it's usually not that exciting. You have these huge peaks in your journey, these huge like high points. But for the most part, it's kind of just like, you have to just show up every day and then do a little bit every single day. And I think that's the stories from real members and remembering, who you're building for really helps, always help motivate me to keep showing up and keep building and keep wanting to make the product better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really amazing that you have stories like that. And I particularly appreciate the fact that you really put your values into the organization, thinking about, yes, you're building a business. Businesses are built to make money, but your primary purpose was to really build it for the community. and really center everything that you did, every product that you delivered after that around community building and creating connections between people. So I want to ask, because I know that you've made another pivot in life with getting married, having kids, trying to, figuring out your what next. Before we get there, you were building this company while you're in high school, while you're in university. What was it like to be at the helm of this organization that was growing, managing all of these different balls in the air? Plus, so that's one question. The second question is, and how did your peers respond to that? Because I imagine it was even today, and if I talk to my family about podcasting or teaching or doing stuff with AI, they really, for the most part, don't know what I do. So I imagine there's a lot of that. But so I'd love to hear some of those things from you.
Yeah. So just learning to balance everything with school and everything was always just challenging. I got really good at prioritizing like things that needed to actually get done to 100% versus things that were like 90% fine. And that's like, I was a good student, like a very, very good student. So I'm not saying like I shirked off a lot of school or anything like that. I definitely don't recommend doing that. But I got very good at like looking at a syllabus and being like, oh, this homework is graded on a check. Like, I don't have to actually work very hard on that. Just turn something in. And, but that's actually an important skill of just prioritizing like where your time goes. Because a lot of time people put a lot of effort getting something from a 95 to 100 when that effort could be much better spent getting something else from a 10 to an 80. And that's like those are the types of things I would try to focus on. But at times the stress was a lot. Like when we closed our Series A, I was a senior in high school. And I remember like, I got so sick. I had like 104-degree fever all of a sudden. Like I was just like, it was like during midterms. I was just so sick. There's like all these things. And I was like better the next day. It was one of those where it's just like, my body was like, okay, you got to slow down. And I would sometimes get those like body wake up calls kind of throughout. Like there's another situation in college. Actually, it was around the time of our Series B. Probably not a coincidence. And I would realize I was like, okay, I need to start prioritizing. It's like, no, I need to like sleep. I need to exercise. I need to do things that treat my body well because I'm breaking down and I shouldn't be breaking down at like 21. And so I think learning to do that though, I've always enjoyed being busy, doing a lot of things. So I feel like if I wasn't building the company, I would have been filling that time with other things. Like maybe it would be Science Olympiad or Model UN or whatever the high school extracurriculars were, but which are two that I really wanted to do, but couldn't. But I'm sure I would have filled it with other things. And so when it came to actually prioritizing what I wanted to do, I started to learn, how to set boundaries about how to keep the things I needed to get done to actually get them done and realize, how it all kind of fits into what I wanted my life to look like. Because if it was just working really hard then on this company, like that is fine. But I did want to go to college. I did want to do these other things. And so that meant that figuring out how it fit. Now for the peers question, there's kind of a difference in high school versus college. So in high school, I got actually a surprising amount of negativity, which was unfortunate. Never from like, the true friends, your actual friends. But there was always like the kid in Spanish class, for instance, that I was like on in the newspaper or something the day before. And he turned to me and said, you're making us all look bad. Or, someone who I had thought we were friendly, but she implied that I was shouldn't apply to any academic scholarships because I was being too greedy. And so there was like little things like that like would come up that, success and likability are negatively correlated for women, positively correlated for men. And I definitely felt that because, whereas like my brother, who's only 15 months older than me, so his classmates all thought, wow, you raised a Series A. That's amazing. You're doing great. Mine was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Or sometimes even just things of like, when I was at events and things like that with my brothers, if I was with them, they would hear about, oh, you're co-founders. And they turn to my brothers and say, oh, so you coded it. And if I was by myself, they'd say, oh, so your brothers did the code. I would just have to be like, none of us did the code. We outsourced that. But it was always very frustrating because obviously the implicit meaning is that they were more involved. They're the real co-founders. They're the real entrepreneurs. And that was very painful kind of dealing with. And it really came to head where it was like a glass shatter, like, oh, it's because I'm a woman. When I was at an entrepreneurship event, it was an entrepreneurship competition, big global competition. And I was I was announced as one of the winners, as one of the 5 finalists. That was great. We're on stage, we're getting our awards, and it was a plaque, a man's watch, and a bottle of cologne.
Oh,
And of course, the organizers were incredibly embarrassed. I later went on actually to keynote one of their events, about 10 years later, and they were just as embarrassed when I reminded them of the story. And, I'm sure it's never happened since. But there were some things that, because of those negative reactions, because of how I could kind of feel othered, or like I had to be a little bit more on my guard. When I went to college, I kind of tried to keep my yearbook as like this secret double life. I didn't want to talk about, lest like I be excluded from like college life.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was in, so there was always like on a need to know basis where I would tell a professor. So in my very first week of school, I actually told my international business professor that I would need to reschedule the midterm. And he was incredibly helpful and happy for me and all of that. It was about, because I was speaking at the World Knowledge Forum in South Korea. So, that's international business. He was cool with that. But, I wasn't being proactive about talking about it, and certainly not with my professors, definitely not with my peers. And it wasn't until I was in a class my sophomore year where the professor, who's, a mentor of mine, and, we still are, share now, had found out about it. And she's like, Catherine, you need to tell us all about this, like just in the middle of the class. And so I, was kind of put on the spot, and I started opening up about it. And then that's when I found out, oh, Georgetown's incredibly supportive. Like my peers were supportive, my professors were supportive. It was just a completely different experience. And, a lot of that was how much of my own confidence had grown, and I could find it. I also at that point realized who I was in a different way, that like when you're building something, sometimes your identity gets so intertwined with it that it's actually kind of hard to figure out like what space you have for yourself. And I think at that point, like I knew who I was. I knew who I was at work, and now they felt like they could actually be together, and that I could be my authentic self, which also happens to be an entrepreneur. And so that kind of was the start of like realizing that, oh, my peers are with me on this, and they're happy for me. And I would see like my friends and I, we were definitely like kind of wing people for each other. So I always had found it difficult to talk about my successes and things like that. I don't find that difficult to talk about my friends' successes at all. And so when I'd be like bragging on my friends' like law school acceptances, and she'd be like, oh, well, my yearbook just did this. And so I think that also really helped, was just having such a supportive community, so that when it made me so much more comfortable to talk about the things that were going well, because I did have this support. But it was something that I had to find, because high school is kind of an awkward time in general. So it's not to say anything bad about anyone I went to high school with. Still very close friends with, of course, the friends from there. But like, everyone's kind of in that weird stage at that point where they kind of want to put other people down, and finding out that kind of ended, and my peers were then supportive afterwards was very nice.
Yeah, that's a fantastic transition. I do want to go back to something that you said when you're doing a pitch competition and you're one of the winners, because I feel like for women today, there's still a lot of these barriers. Not always, but when I go to these events, it's mostly men. When I talk about AI, then I love being able to be in the room, even though I came from a non-technical background and I'm now starting to build products. But I think it's still a surprise to a lot of the other gender that there are women who are really involved in these ventures. So I know that's part of what you're trying to help new entrepreneurs with today. So I want to know, do you think that you were one of the people who's able to help drive change and help people see that, yes, women can be successful. We are the founders. We are the ones who came up with the concept. We're not just the little sister, who can be put by the wayside. And then I want to hear about how you use that when you were meeting with boardrooms and investors and people who might dismiss you.
Right. So in times I've kind of almost found a way to spin it, because as much as it sucks to be one of the few women in a room, it also makes you that much more memorable. And so at some events, there was like, I had the feeling that they remembered what our company was, because they're like, that one had a girl on it, and so that's awful. But like at the same time, it was, if you go into the room knowing to your core that you belong there, and that was generally how I would enter would be in those meetings. Like I would have that confidence because I knew my company better than anyone else there. Like I am the expert in this.
Right.
And so when I'm talking about our users, when I'm talking about what we're building, I think the passion that I felt for it would just carry through.
Mhm.
And so even when the nerves were there at the beginning, I think they would fall away because of that. And then, like I said, it actually helps to be like a little bit more memorable. It's not in the outsider, but like when you're like, so we would have like these, when we were public, like investor conferences where frankly would be we would just sit at the table and would give the same presentation like 8 times in a row for like as new people filed in. Like that's just how those were run. And like knowing that it was like a 90% male, like just like honestly, if you're trying to think back to the companies you met with, it helps to have people that look a little different. And so that there were times where you can kind of spin it. A lot of it though is just coming from like your own passion entering the room. And I think that that's going to help a lot. But what we really need, of course, is the systemic changes that make it so that it's not uncommon to be a woman entrepreneur. And for that, I think you need the stories getting out there. You need people talking about their successes, saying what they're working on and not being ashamed of it, and just actually sharing like, this is what I'm working on. And of course, connecting with each other about it. Because I think that that's one of the superpowers that women really have is that, you know, we do bring other people along for the journey. As a group, we tend to be, you know, very supportive of each other and very community oriented where, you know, if something we're working on is troubling, we're less concerned about asking for help. And I think that that's a key skill that is going to help any entrepreneur do well, is being able to say, oh, I don't, you know, I'm willing to ask for help. I'm willing to reach out to my community. Because I think that one of the main mistakes a lot of entrepreneurs make is that they get afraid to ask for help. And there's no one that knows how to do all the things. Like you can ask your AI all you want how to do something, but there's no replacement for going out and talking to people and, you know, and getting out there. So I think that that's, you know, one of those changes. But I think, you know, systemically, ways that organizations can just start realizing that women are not only in the room, but like building the experience for both men and women. And that was like one of those things, like I had mentioned that entrepreneurship competition, when I went to keynote later, what was like such an amazing shift. So I was breastfeeding at the time and I had let the event organizer know, and she was like, oh, when do you want to pump? I can schedule that in. Like, and that was something I wouldn't have asked for. I had just asked for like, is there a space I can do it? And she's like, let me create the schedule with that in mind. And which was like enormously supportive. And of course, no one else there has to know like the schedule is that way because of my pumping schedule. Yeah. But knowing that was, you know, that support was there. And the only reason it was there was because I just did something. And of course, she, being a mom herself, foresaw, was like, oh, this is something that she probably needs. And I think if everyone collectively can just think about what other people that might need, that would make not only a space accommodating for other people, but fully accessible, is important. And I like that. And I borrow that from Tiffany Yu. She wrote the Anti-Ableist Manifesto and CEO of Diversibility. And I went to college with her. And, you know, she draws this difference between, you know, the accommodations, which is like the Band-Aid at the end, and then the accessibility, which is like realizing that, no, we can, you know, everybody is unique. If we create this, you know, an experience that makes it accessible for everyone from the start, then everyone's voices can be heard and it can just be so much more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. You're going to have to also be on my USC podcast because it's a lot of what we talk about with my students. Oh. Yeah. As they're creating their digital capstone projects. So a lot of connections there. I want to then turn, because a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that you share in your book as lessons you've learned, things that can be inspirational for others to follow, how they can find their North Star. So what took you from, you know, having your business, obviously getting married, having kids while you're still fully in operation, scaling up, you know, selling and then exiting, and then deciding I need to help others. I want to write this book so that others can be inspired by what I learned. And then your office hours and all the other things that you're now putting into the world.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think that, you know, what kind of led to that, honestly, was just a conversation with one of my best friends. So, and it was just like kind of this realization. So I'm talking to Alyssa on the phone and she called me upset because like basically things were falling apart at work. And when things are falling apart at work, they kind of feel like they're falling apart everywhere else. Like you think that you're, you know, a worse parent because you're not, I don't know, meal prepping enough, or you're being a little bit snappier than usual, which she totally wasn't, to be clear. But at the same time, like, she felt like she was letting other people down. And even though she wasn't, she was telling herself kind of this like negative self-talk of like, I should be better. I should be adapting to this. And I realized that a lot of what she was going through was things that, I went through building the company. I was like, you know what? I think that there's this connection between how I learned to just kind of manage all this mess going on with my life and how I think that it can really help others. And if we can actually because I think that it's such a common experience to have like all of these pressures. And that's really at the end of the day what being a young entrepreneur was. It was a ton of pressure. And so something I learned how to deal with from a much younger age. And now, of course, I'm still learning how to deal with so much of it. Like, yeah, there's always something that comes up and I'll be like, oh, wait, I should take my own advice in this situation. Like, don't imposters, there's all these things that, are always going to kind of be a work in progress. And talking to her made me realize it's like, oh, these are the things I want to tell her. And I wanted to tell everyone. It's like, we can control our environment way more than we think we can. And if we set these things in place, if we are serious about setting boundaries, if we're more efficient about making decisions, then the rest of your life improves because everything just works together. Like the spheres of your life are always going to integrate. And so finding ways that you can make them connect is what matters. And so anyway, so that's why I wrote Designing Success. And I was like, okay, I think that there's things that we can learn. I wrote it specifically for Alyssa. Like, and I think that comes through in the book because I wrote it as if I'm speaking to my friend. And I think that helps because it just made it a lot more focused as I was writing it. I was like, no, these are the things that like Alyssa's dealing with, that Casey's dealing with. Like, this is like the stuff that we have all had going on. And so anyway, so that's why I wrote the book and why I was so excited to, kind of get it out there. And then the office hours and all of that stuff is just because I love giving back to the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so I do it anyway. So I was like, let's make it official and have it like an official. That way, it's, planned, it's on the calendar. It's easy to do. And it's just one of those ways that I just love connecting with others. Because as much as, it's always helpful to hear what other people's questions are. Because when you hear other people's questions because a lot of times it's things that you are probably dealing with yourself. And when you start talking to other people, it actually helps you solve things in your own life too. So, it's not that I do office hours because I only need it to help myself, but it does always help me. So part of the reasons part of the things I've noticed about giving back to like my outer community is that I always learn in the process too. And I think that's, that's why you do it. That's why when your calendar is full and I can't deal with going out to dinner tonight and talking with each other. It's like, no, just do it and you'll enjoy it. And I think that's true of like, having my office hours. And that's true of like the things I'm trying to build to help entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Well, what was that point when you decided to, number one, I guess the real question is, did you always plan to exit? Was that part of what you were building at the end? And what was that point when you decided, okay, yeah, now is the time for me. We've sold the company. Now's the time for me to let this journey go and move on to this other part of my life.
Yeah. So it was kind of expected. So we had sold the company in 2020. It was a $500 million deal. So we had I worked for the new parent company for 3 years. And it was at that point, my daughter was 4 months old. I had just returned from maternity leave. And it's like, this was like just a very fitting time in so many ways. It was just like where the company had gotten to, that I felt, what we built was like, I think there's points in your journey where it's a very noticeable, there's an inflection point. There's a chapter close, and that just felt like what it was. And that was, so it just kind of worked.
Yeah. Fantastic. And what is some of this beside you? So you have the book, you have the office hours, you're obviously teaching, training other people. Do you have another project idea that you want to launch? Do you see something? Is there something else swirling in the back of your head that you're like, okay, because I know you mentioned earlier, and kind of like myself as well, you always like to be doing a lot of different things. I'm sure you have other ideas that you haven't necessarily fleshed out yet because of time.
Yeah, so there's two things I'm currently working on, but I'm not ready to talk about them yet. But yes, it's two kind of startup ideas that I'm currently working on. Obviously, I don't know how, what will happen in either situation, but I'm excited because I love always building something. And, part of the initial building something is sometimes finding out, I don't want to do this actually. And sometimes it's, I really want to do this. And so, I'm excited to just continue to work on that. And then on kind of my own personal side, I just actually launched an Adulting 101 email challenge for recent grads who, want to learn some skills that are inspired from the entrepreneurial mindset that kind of can help them with the transition from school to their post-grad experience. Because, things like bouncing back from failure and taking initiative, how to manage your time and things like that. Because I think that, and I want to continue creating things like that too, because I feel like there's so much, I do a lot at some of the universities I'm affiliated with, and they've generally what I've heard from professors, they've generally noticed this shift in the student body in the last 10 years or so. And I feel like a lot of the things, they're going to learn this stuff soon. They're when they're in the role. If I can help them, I would like to. Because I think that there's a lot of things that are just so much different than when I entered, the real world post-school. And, the world is just a little different now, and making it feel a little bit more real community rather than just network, which is, a different aspect I think is important. So anyway, so that's one of the things I'm personally building. So I was this is something that I'm interested in. So I created that. It's free. It's just, gift for grads. But, so I'm looking for other ways that, any ways that that my experience can help benefit others. Because, I think, like I said, a lot of this, same questions that, I grappled with, I think lots of people are grappling with. And, I think there's a lot of value in just talking with others and hearing stories and learning from other stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the distinction you made between networking and building community. I think that's really important for people to think about and realize. I know, because of course at universities, one of the biggest selling points is our networks. But to really take advantage of the network, you have to have that community aspect.
Right.
Yeah.
And to do that, it's and to be a part of community means that you're also giving to it. I think there's a lot of what can I get from this community? The only way you actually have community is if you're finding ways to help others within it.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that we're going to have a link in the show notes that gives people a free digital copy of the book. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Yeah. So
please review it.
Yeah, and that's something that you and I talked about, is the importance of reviews. So if you are going to take listeners or viewers, if you're going to take advantage of this offer, please do leave a review for the book, because those reviews, like with podcasts, they help discoverability. They help people understand and who you are and what you're really trying to show and how it's helped them. So yeah, so we'll have those links, and I definitely want to have you on once you're launching your other ideas. I'd love to have another conversation with you, Catherine. And I did want to ask, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, words of wisdom that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah. So one of my favorites right now, and it shifts, but is a quote by Picasso: "Action is the foundational key to all success." And I just like that because, that's all it is. It's taking action and not just waiting around, but what is the next step? Taking that action, taking the next action. And I think that that's something I always need to remind myself.
Yeah, something we all need to remember. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for offering your wisdom, advice, and bringing your perspective. This has been really fun. And
thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. And I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their story, their journey, and some actionable things for you to think about for yours. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.